Welcome to Season 2 of OnListening. This is your host, Daniel Rosen. Thank you for joining us as we continue to explore listening in all its dimensions. Continue listening after the interview is over for some information about engagement with the show. Thank you. On this episode of OnListening, I have the distinct pleasure to interview my friend and colleague, Elliot Kronenfeld, founder and director of Insight Brookline Psychotherapy, one of the largest outpatient psychotherapy centers in the Boston area. He's a certified sex therapist and more recently, congratulations, a certified supervisor of sex therapy. And he's the author of Couples by Intention. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am very excited to have you. We have talked about listening, and I just want to give you, I am so excited. Elliot listened to all of season 1, which he just told me that before the show, and boy, did that feel good. That was great. I have a very open introduction. What would you like to say about listening? And of course, there's more refined questions if that's too broad.
You know, I think that listening, I love that there's a podcast on listening. And I think that what you're doing is such a gift because, you know, we often talk to children and to people about how to speak, but we don't teach people how to listen. And sometimes we just say, you know, active listening, where you just go, yep, and you make facial expressions, but you don't actually listen. And what I love about this podcast is that we're actually talking that listening is a really strategic and comprehensive skill that needs to be learned and practiced, and that there are so many different ways to listen based on the context and the situation and the relationship. And so I love that we're talking about listening in all of these forms. I think it's amazing.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. And we don't train people as much to listen. There's anybody can join Toastmasters and get much better at public speaking. I don't know if there's an equivalent listening masters kind of thing.
Right. You know, and it's so, you know, as a couples therapist, I spend the majority of the start of my work with a couple on just practicing listening skills. Because before I work with a couple to, you know, help them find meaning or resolution, whatever it is that brought them to my office, we can't even begin that work until we know how to listen. So the first thing we open with is learning how to listen.
Yeah, I think I err on the side of diving in a little quicker, but I agree with you. That's certainly the aspiration, but when I listen, it's so easy to get pulled in so quickly. I find that as I'm interviewing people and in clinical work, and the thoughts in my head come up quick sometimes.
Yeah, you know, and one of the things is that I find when I slow people down and I ask them about their listening, they usually give me a quizzical look and don't know what I'm talking about. And that's usually the indicator that we have to move it. Like your opening question, what do you like about listening? Most people would never know how to answer that question. And it's such a simple question, but it's actually very complex.
Yes. I think that what I'm hoping to accomplish a little bit is, how do you sneak in something quote unquote educational in an entertainment podcast or and so I want to congratulate my guests for never being didactic, never being lecture-y, but just talking about their experiences, and that there's a lot to learn from that.
Yeah. You know, I think that part of it is that's all we can do is talk about our experiences and help people to talk about theirs, right? Because there's no right way. Like, I don't actually try to teach people how to listen. I try to teach people how to be curious, because it's in the curiosity that we open ourselves up to taking in new information. And that's how I think we get to listening. Listening without curiosity is meaningless.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. Right. It's recording.
Right. Well, I think that, part of it is curiosity is when you allow yourself not to know. Curiosity is when you don't make assumptions, and curiosity is when you realize you don't know everything about the other person. And to be a really good listener, you have to be deeply curious. And it's interesting because we know when people are curious about us and we know when they're not. And when we feel like somebody is curious about us, it opens us up and it allows us to go deeper, go broader, be more present. Right? And we should
Yes.
do the same to others.
I agree, and yet it's hard because I can have a feeling that you're listening to me and not necessarily know how to induce that state in you. I've certainly had that experience of I
What does
feel
that
your
mean?
yeah, so sometimes I try to listen to someone with curiosity, and there's this misfire. They either feel insulted or misunderstood.
Yeah, I think that part of it too is the curiosity is one of those strategic relationship skills, because if we don't do it well, it can sound like we're cross-examining or interrogating somebody, and that never feels good. But to be able to use curiosity in a way that builds a bridge to somebody, one of the things that I find myself doing, because it is such a struggle, is I simply say, "Can I be curious with you for a minute? Can I be curious?"
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I like that. So you're being, so there's three things that you're appreciating a direct approach in three different areas. One, you're liking my question, tell me about listening. Two, you're asking your clients to speak specifically about listening. And three, you're saying if you want to demonstrate curiosity, you're going to name it and discuss it up front. I bet that's really helpful to just call these things out for what they are simply.
Well, and I think that the other thing that it does, Dan, is it helps the listener to manage their own anxiety. Sometimes in listening, it can be a highly anxious process. And, because if we're too busy going in our own head, thinking about what our response is going to be, or how we're going to counter what we're hearing, or thinking about, is this something that we have heard before? We're actually not listening. We're actually making the experience more about ourselves. And so in teaching people how to be really direct and saying, "Can I be curious?" it allows you to get out of your own head and put it out on the table openly, so that you don't have to be managing that work internally while pretending or struggling to listen externally.
I couldn't agree more. I'm definitely having the experience of feeling you slow me down. I've talked to you at times when we're not, under these conditions, and
That's right.
and you'll be more energetic and animated, and you're, I feel I imagine it's a cultivated skill. You've intentionally paced yourself differently, and it's effective. I feel it as kind of a relaxation, an invitation to slow down.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I don't know if I would say that I do that intentionally or if I just do that more instinctually. But when I start opening up in this way, I think it is really important to slow down and to be a little more elementary, to be a little more obvious, be a little more direct. And then, as you say, Dan, there are certainly times you and I have talked and it's been very high energy and very fast. And we talk over each other and, it's very funny. But this is a very different kind of conversation, isn't it? This is one where we're trying to really figure out each other's position. And we're trying to figure out the differences between us. And that requires us to go a little slower.
I like you labeling that sort of supposing that that's one of the things that I'm doing. I am. I'm trying to. So what am I navigating? I'm navigating kind of directing the show, and also navigating looking for an opening when you're sort of going to bust out with something that I'm having the idea that you might have a thing you want to get to. And so that's right. You're sort of, there's that feeling out experience. I like and naming it. I like your naming it. It's very helpful.
Yeah, I think that part of this is that when, especially when we know the conversation has a particular direction, like today's conversation is about listening, the different ways that we listen. And you and I, in many ways, do very similar work, don't we? And
yes.
We have and I can say this quite confidently because we know each other so well, in many ways you and I have a very similar style and presentation. We work with many of the same issues, but I think that in many ways we bring those individual life experiences and cultural sensitivities. I mean, you and I live in different parts of the country, and that impacts it. And we have different life narratives. And, we clinically, in some ways, also take a very particular perspective, and it changes over time. Like right now I'm doing a lot of research, and, this research has me listening in a very particular way. And when I'm not doing research and I'm sitting in my office with a client or a couple of clients at a time, I listen differently. Versus when I'm home with my family, I listen very different. It's always about having multiple listening skills and knowing how to deploy them. It always is a conscious choice.
When it goes well. When it goes
well. I would like that saying, all right, so we're being really honest here. When I'm doing well, it's a conscious choice. And when I'm not, it's a healthy reminder that I need to get my act together. Fair enough.
Yes, that's certainly my experience. I want to, so here's, you're funny. And now you're matching me with laughing, which I've talked about in other episodes. That's nice. Here's what I'm going to ask a favor of you.
Okay.
If you feel like I slipped in the listening, if you felt that there was something that, like after you said it, you realize, oh wait, I kind of wanted Dan to pick up on this part. If you felt that my listening could have been different, trying not to be hierarchical there, if it could have been different, I want you to point it out. I want this show as a recursive experience where we're talking about it and then commenting on the process as it happens.
Oh, I love that. And vice versa. Do the same for me, please.
I will keep that in mind. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that is an open invitation.
Good. So you'd mentioned that you liked Kit Miller's episode before we started. And Kit was just great, giving me permission to interrupt. It was so... and sort of describing how that's you have to interrupt sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think it's not just interrupting. I think that a really good listener talks as much as the speaker, because that's how we confirm our understanding of what you're saying. Right? If I'm just looking at you and nodding, you don't know what I'm taking in. And so that's one of the things that I loved about the episode with Kit Miller, is that it was like this dance the two of you were doing. And Kit was talking about her life experience and how she got through into her career and balancing family. And it really resonated for me. And it was this dialogue of the two of you going back and forth, where you talking was you exhibiting your understanding of her story. It was your ability to say, yes, and.
Yeah, that's a good one. Right, yes, and. Oh, good. That's, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed them all, but there was a nice flow there with Kit.
Yeah, and I think that the more you did that, what I noticed is that Kit's story got richer the more you validated, the more you talked. It encouraged her to share more. It encouraged her to come alive. And it was, if we're going to be totally transparent, I was on the Peloton listening to the two of you chat. And, normally, when I'm in there, I just want to go in my zone and, get a little exercise. And in this COVID pandemic, we do what we can to keep ourselves moving. And I actually found that I stopped pedaling because I didn't want to miss the back and forth, the repartee, because what I noticed is the two of you, not only were you dancing together, but it was a step up and a step up and a step up and a step up. And I think that's particularly why, out of all of the podcasts, this was the most memorable. I thought they were all terrific, but there was something about the dynamic between the two of you, and the dance you did was, it was more obvious.
Well, I'm, of course, just all tingly right now hearing that. And,
yay!
Yeah, right. But it makes me, so here's what it makes me do. It makes me want to do that thing I said that's hard sometimes. So I would like to invite you to share more about yourself. Share more about either it could be why you wanted to come on the podcast, a thing in your life that's happening around listening, some research you're doing,
So I think there's a couple of things. First of all, why did I want to come on the podcast is, first of all, I really respect you as a clinician and in the work that you're doing in the clinic that you're running. And I personally just so enjoy spending time with you that any chance I get to spend time with you, I will take. But I think that you're doing something really important here, because we don't talk about listening. We don't explore listening. We don't talk about how listening is hard. And so you've created this platform that encourages people to identify that listening is not a skill, but it is a whole set of skills. And I want to be able to take that and really stretch that out. And listening is one of those core critical skills that I think is the foundation of my practice. And I wanted to be able to jump in that playing field with you. It has become even more apparent to me. I mentioned the research that I'm doing. Right now, I am writing my dissertation for my PhD in human sexuality, and I have just finished, doing all of my research, and I'm coding. And my research was about interviewing men who went to therapy after having an infidelity, and how they understood their experience in therapy, and how they processed the shifts in their life. And I found that this took a very particular kind of listening, and talking to them about, how did your therapist listen to you? How did your partner listen to you? How did your affair partner listen to you? And listening to these men really talk about the fact that even going through all of this life experience, in many cases, these men did not identify that their therapists were listening to them, that there were so many things that weren't being picked up on. And when I would talk to them about it, you could see relief come over these men when somebody would ask them about something that they had hoped somebody would ask them, and they were like, oh, there's something that nobody's ever asked me. And you could see them just opening up and flourishing, and it was really rewarding. And of course, as a researcher, I don't get to do much with that with them. And I'm like, well, then take that back to your therapist. And how many of those men said, I will. And you could see the energy. You could just watch somebody come alive simply by listening to them. It was brilliant, actually. It was a brilliant experience.
That sounds phenomenal. I'm going to throw this word in. It's season 2, which so you haven't heard it yet. But the concept of a taxonomy of listening, that there's different contexts and there's ways and tools that we listen. And so even though you spend the bulk of your time as a clinician listening, you found that as a researcher, you listened in a different way. That's just fascinating. And in a way that then was therapeutic for the people who you were interviewing.
Yeah, and it really shocked me because I went into the research with this false assumption that I'm a clinician, I know how to listen, and I think I'm pretty good at it. I was just a little cocky, and I was, excited to have these interviews. And as I started interviewing, I realized because these men I was talking to, they weren't on my therapy couch. They weren't there for me. So the power dynamic was different. And as the researchers, the interviewer, there was still a position of authority that I had because I controlled the interview. But I didn't get to therapize them, and I didn't get to share with them my opinions. I was purely there to listen. I wasn't there to give anything. And so I really had to ask questions differently than if I was their clinician. And I had to make a space for them to go wherever they wanted. And I wasn't there to direct a process. And in the end, what I found was that because I was listening differently, what I got back was so much richer. And it has certainly impacted the way I listen in my therapy room. So I think that my clinical therapy listening has improved because I learned how to listen as a researcher. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. My listening improved when I did improvisational theater. I thought that I knew how to listen, and then I had the incredibly humbling experience of all these other people listening in a more effective way than me, and it's part of the inspiration for the podcast was the awareness that how difficult it is. Maybe it may be a way to think about it. I'm segueing a little bit, riffing off myself. Maybe again, instead of these sort of hierarchical good or bad, what if Elliot? What if we have an unlimited capacity to improve the quality of our listening, and the more we practice it in different domains, contexts, and challenging situations, the better we'll get. Like how fast a human can run the mile keeps getting shorter and shorter. Maybe we haven't even tapped the capacity of a human to listen.
Well, I think that's exactly right, because listening is a mindfulness practice. It's like yoga, it's like meditation. It's never yoga, I got it. It's yoga practice. It's meditation practice, not meditation, I got it. And I think that listening is very much the same way. Listening is a practice that we constantly have to hone, because I think that, first of all, we change physically and cognitively. We're changing all the time. Our worldview is changing all the time. Our positionality is changing all the time, and sometimes very dramatically and sometimes very subtly. I mean, if I just think about what's gone on in the world in the last 90 days and how that has changed everything for me, and it changes the way that I listen. And as I get older, and my hearing is not as good, and I wear hearing aids now, and realizing that my family was begging me, please go get your ears tested, like you're driving us crazy. And when I put in hearing aids, I realized, oh my God, so many things that I wasn't picking up on, the nuances, the subtleties, the breath, all of that. And so it is a practice. It is never listening, I got it. And then I think the other piece, if I can just add...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So there's no, like, someone could say I'm a good listener or a not good listener, and some of the other guests talked about how you just keep getting better. Right. Sorry. Just wanted to throw that in.
It's iterative development.
Yeah.
Right? It's iterative development. And so it's constantly about, where am I in this situation and how do I position myself? It's really interesting. It's how we orient ourselves to the thing or the person we're listening to. It's always about orientation. It's about, and what I mean by that, it's how we develop a relationship with that object that we're listening to, whether it's a person or a podcast or a piece of music, and it's a relationship. And it is, what is the utility that I serve for that piece that I'm listening to, and what is the utility it serves for me because that defines how I listen. Is it something that I am supposed to emote or something I'm supposed to cognitively understand? Is it something that I have to feed back on? And so that relationship, that orientation I have. But, the other piece about it, too, around listening, is I have found that as I develop these relationships, as I build these, it's also about how I understand the meaning of what I'm listening to. And I have found that for me, one of the questions I catch myself asking a lot when I'm listening is, and what does that mean? What does that mean to you? What are you hoping that means to me? Because it's not just cognitively understanding the literal, right? We can understand the literal, but what does it mean?
What is it? What's this emotional significance of it, or what is it? How do you, in light of that truth, how do you observe yourself? How do you experience yourself?
How does it change you?
Yeah.
How does it orient you? Right?
Mm-hmm.
If I have somebody who tells me that they've had an infidelity, I want to know how that orients them to their relationship, how it orients themselves to their own identity, how does it orient themselves in the way they see themselves as a person of the world.
I've just had this idea pop into my mind that you view people who have had an infidelity as almost a marginalized population.
Oh, I do. Because they're so criminalized. You've had an infidelity, you're a bad person. And, there's certainly enough infidelity literature out there by really wonderful people that will tell you that, infidelities happen in really good relationships too. But there's all kinds of infidelity. It's not just sexual or emotional. You can have financial infidelity. You can have social infidelity. You can have spiritual infidelity. And oftentimes those infidelities, they're not labeled as infidelity, but they certainly are treated as such. And people are certainly criminalized in the same way. And the nugget of my research that I'm really going after is the phenomena of disenfranchised grief that these men experience after having an infidelity, and helping them
You're going to have to define that for people.
I would love to. So disenfranchised grief is grief that is experienced that cannot be stated and cannot be shown publicly because there is a fear or reality that grief will not be supported or will not be recognized or will not be validated. So for example, how does a man who wants to repair his relationship with his primary partner say, I really love you and I want to heal this relationship, but I am grieving the loss of my affair partner. Even though I don't want to be with my affair partner, even though I'm sorry it happened and I'm glad that it's over, but I grieve the loss of how I felt when I was there. Because you can't say it. How does the impacted partner say to their friends, my partner had an infidelity and I want to stay and make it work and I forgive, because the friends are going to say, you throw that dog to the curb. How are you putting up with that? You deserve better than that. So you can't say the thing that grieves you because it's unsupported or you have a fear that it'll be unsupported. In ultimate, it means you're afraid that people won't hear you, they won't listen to you because they open up with the judgment and the narrative. And so what I'm trying to do in this research is to listen to that disenfranchised grief, because these men feel like nobody else will.
I want to go back a half step. When you said, so you used the word listen, and you said these people, each party in these relationships, can't talk about it. It's disenfranchised because other people won't listen. And now I know there's people in the audience who are the person that someone confided in about an affair. And you're defining listening by the expansive, really listening, not just hearing, not just like, oh yeah, now I got this story and now I'm going to tell you to leave, or now I got a story and tell you you're an idiot, but how to deeply attend.
Well, right. It's not the facts of the affair. It is the how do I feel about it and where do I feel pain? You know, a lot of the men that I'm talking to feel disenfranchised grief because they can never again say, I'm the man who never cheated. The fact that I can never say that again. Like, and how do I tell somebody how much that pains me? I can't, because I'm the man who did it. I have to shut up and bear it. Or the fact that I wasn't the role model for my children that I had always hoped to be. Like, there are so many places for disenfranchised grief to live after an infidelity. And the whole reason why I'm doing this research is because I actually want to create curriculum to teach therapists how to find that disenfranchised grief, how to listen to it so people can feel heard, so that we can heal the grief. Because what happens...
Well, haven't you answered that? Yes, you research it.
I'm working on it. The book is coming.
I mean,
yeah.
You said that the way you got it was to listen not like a therapist, but to be the researcher who just completely...
Right, but how do we do that as a therapist then is the question, right? But how do we teach? Because we don't teach therapists how to do that. And that's part of what I want to do, because what often happens, what I'm finding, is these men are often misdiagnosed as depressed, as anxious, as avoidant, as angry, as shut down. And what it really is, it's grief. And we're not treating it like grief, we're treating it as something else. And what that also means is we're not helping the partner to heal either.
Go on, how are we not helping them? Oh, but we're not helping the partner to heal by listening to their stories of why they want to stay?
Well, that's a great question. Well, if the partner doesn't understand that the person who cheated on them experiences grief, but they only see them as avoidant, angry, depressed, resistant, short-tempered, right? They don't understand that what they're dealing with in their partner is grief. It's harder to build that bridge between the partners. And what we often do in infidelity recovery therapy is we want the person who had the infidelity to listen to all the pain and agony of the impacted partner. And it's really hard to get the impacted partner to hear from the partner who had infidelity.
Yes.
And that is magic when we can get that to happen.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm getting a lot out of in this research is when I will say to the men, so, have you talked to your partner about these things? And the men all say to me, I can't tell them. I can't talk to her about this because right now she's in too much pain. And I said, well, have you talked to the therapist? Has the therapist helped you to get this out? No, right now we're focused on her pain. And for some of these men, they've been in therapy for 2 years.
You mean in couples therapy?
Yeah, it's 2 years post-discovery.
I did the thing that I said I wasn't going to do. I made an assumption, and what that did to me was make me wonder if I heard you correctly. I think that you ended up saying then that if a couple is going for counseling and a man a man who committed infidelity wants to heal from this, there has to be room for his story. And that if that's disenfranchised, the betrayed partner, won't get all the therapeutic benefit.
That's right.
If that isn't resolved.
Well, that's right, because the partner doesn't get the whole story and doesn't get the full meaning. Again, one of my favorite questions is, what does that mean? So it's not just getting the story. But what does that mean? And I think that's the kind of listening in these situations that becomes really important. So if a man who's had an infidelity says, I grieve the loss of my affair partner because when I was there, I felt desired, I felt important, I felt powerful. It's not that he misses that person. It's that he misses what it meant to him. Right? Because then we can ask the questions such as, so why can't you feel powerful in this marriage? Why do you feel undesired here? And to ask that question, to listen to that answer, not in a way to blame or condemn the impacted partner, but to learn how to craft that story out through listening and through meaning finding so that he can feel heard and so that she can learn how to listen. Now, my research is with hetero cisgendered men. And I want to be really clear that, some of these social dynamics and the expectations and the scripts and the narratives that we have, are very different in different types of couples. So I know that we're talking from a very heteronormative language, but that's because that's where my research is situated right now. I think it would be a really interesting lesson to compare what I'm doing. How might it sound different if we were talking about infidelity in a polyamorous couple or in a same-gendered couple? How would that be? But right now, I'm really looking at heteronormative couples. So I just want to be really clear that I'm not making some big assumptions that everybody's the same.
Well, good. I'm glad that's a helpful caveat to remind people.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's fascinating research. It's it's eye-opening to listen to, and I'm enjoying listening to it.
So, can I ask you a question?
Please.
So, tell me about how you understand disenfranchised grief. Is this something new to you? Have you experienced in your practice? And how do you listen for it, if it's something that you're aware of?
It's a term that's newer in my vocabulary. And I think that I like the feeling of helping someone uncover something or describe something that they haven't talked about before. So there's a part of me that feels like disenfranchised grief is sort of a fancy name for a thing that's already been there, but I'm also aware that calling it as such turns my attention to seeking it more, like almost assuming that people might have a disenfranchised grief. I see it, so where do I see it? Men with sexual dysfunction. Very hard to talk about how their penis isn't doing what it used to do. Women who've had my sample size is smaller in working with women, but women who've, for example, lost their breast tissue for surgery, and the loss of the nipple for some people. How do you talk about that? Sometimes is kind of it's a hard thing to talk about.
Yeah. I think that those are great examples. I also do a lot of fertility work, and I see a lot of disenfranchised grief in people who are struggling with fertility. Because they will talk about their fertility challenge or their fertility losses, and people will say things, well, keep trying, or, at least you get to go on vacation, you're not straddled with kids, or, they'll say things like, well, you can always adopt, and
Right.
those are forms of the way people aren't actually listening to the grief, when people just want to take whatever pain somebody is feeling and come up with a solution. Because, we don't like pain. We can't tolerate pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain. And, to see somebody in pain, our gut level reaction is get away from it as fast as you can. And to be a really, first of all, just not only a really effective listener, but a kind listener, is to realize that their pain isn't yours to solve, but to let them know you hear their pain is really the greatest gift you can give them.
Yes. It's I think of the sort of idea that it's the responsibility of those who've suffered less to bear witness to those who've suffered more.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I used to think of my profession as that, And now, again, I'm less hierarchical, and realizing as I get older that there's as in many ways, there's aspects of my life that are, I'm privileged, but not as privileged as I think I am. Uncovering awarenesses of suffering, and so now I sort of balance it out. We all just kind of have to listen to each other and bear witness to each other, because that experience of being heard and understood is curative. Even people who are deeply wounded can provide a cure. Now I sound so patronizing. I used to have the idea. Maybe you're going to help me with this.
I don't think it's patronizing. I don't think it's patronizing at all. I think you're exactly on it.
What's the thing you think I'm on?
Well, because this is actually something I do with couples all the time. I actually have a whole piece in my book on it, where we do this exercise called the listening hours, and I do it over a number of weeks, and I give them homework assignments to listen, and I tell them, so one person has to share a story, and they go on a listening hour date, and the listener sets up the date, and they invite a question, and I teach them how to invite a question. So it doesn't come across as an interrogation, or it doesn't come across as an interview. But tell me about a time when. Tell me a story about. And I teach them how to cast this really broad net. And then their job is to listen for an hour. And I say, when you listen, you have two jobs to do. And you must do them in equal measure, and you must do them at the same time. The first is to bear witness, which means you don't go in your head, you don't make it about you don't think about your reactions, you don't think about what you want to say. It is all about the other person's experience. And the second, your job is to expand the story. Stretch it out, go deeper, get more. And how do you ask for follow-up questions? And I teach them how to ask these types of questions. So your whole thing about bearing witness is such a critical part of listening. And like I said, so we've crafted this whole exercise to teach people how to bear witness, but to do it while you're expanding. And the feedback I get from couples after doing this exercise is, first of all, how hard it is. And especially when they've been with a partner for 20 years and they realize how little they know about them. And the second thing is how exhausting it is.
Mm-hmm.
That
I'm wiped out after a podcast.
Right. Right. I'm going to sap all your energy today, right?
That's right.
But it is listening, and anyone who's a clinician knows at the end of the day, we are exhausted, and my kids tease me all the time, like, oh, all you do is sit there and listen to people all day. And I'm like, you try it. Like, it's not easy, right? I'm like, you don't listen to me for 5 minutes, so don't tell me you know how tiring it is. So,
That's right.
But that bearing witness piece, I think you're right on it.
Good. I think there was a little disclosure in there. I used to have this idea that the healer sort of had to be in this healthier state, and that's the part that I've dropped. I have learned the lessons I've learned in my life. So many of the most important lessons have come from people who've been more wounded than myself, and I've been in this historic position of arrogance, thinking that there's a weight of knowledge that has to do with like education and university degrees, where lived experience and painful experience, the people I admire the most have been harmed so much and have brought out the best in me in such a way that I'm have such gratitude, and then think back about how I had it all backwards in some way in my past. Right.
And so that's a special kind of listening, right? That's how do we listen to ourselves, right? Because we always think of listening as an outward activity, but these same skills can also be turned inward, and we often forget that that's also a form of listening, and it's the same skill. It
is the same skill, and as I'm listening to you, I was so, I was having an experience of admiring that book you wrote, which I haven't read, by the way. I'm not interviewing you because I know you wrote that book. And to think about that exercise, listening to that put me in kind of in a student frame of mind.
We weren't going to be didactic.
No, I know you weren't didactic. You weren't, but it just put me in this other frame of like I sort of like it, but it's uncomfortable. It took me far away from being the host of the show. I think that's it. I think that moment, if we talk about listening, that moment, I had the highest level of awareness of feeling like I'm not really in control of what's going on here, and it's fascinating, disconcerting, but that's what we want. We want to be able to have that vulnerable moment of, I really don't know what's coming next. I really don't know what's going to happen.
So what you were doing is listening. You were paying attention.
I was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. Because and I love that you said that, Dan. That's really exciting, because if you were so confident on what was coming next, it means you were paying more attention to your agenda and your outline and trying to get to a very particular place. Instead, you were listening to the experience that was happening around you, and you were taking it in. You were listening.
Yeah. Right. I just want to get that book and have people I work with do some of those exercises.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that book, actually. There's a lot of really great exercises in there that really look at listening, that really look at understanding and challenging the way that we find meaning in things. The book Couples by Intention, because it was titled very particularly because one of the things I say in my room all the time is, I only want to work with couples who want to be here intentionally. I don't do couples by default. I only do couples by intention. And the book is actually based off of a group that I run where I take 6 couples at a time and I put them in a room together for 12 weeks. And I do really diverse groups. I do same-gender couples.
Say that again. I want to.
So I take 6 couples, 6 very diverse
new
couples.
No,
these are established couples, and they meet for 90 minutes once a week for 12 weeks. And I have same-gender couples, I have trans couples, I have queer couples, I have straight couples, I have racially diverse couples, I have economically diverse couples, I have people that have been together 2 years, some that have infants, some that have kids in college, some that are grandparents. I really get this diverse group of couples together. And we do this process of what does it mean to be an intentional couple, and what does it mean to listen to each other? And then these couples start listening to each other, and they start realizing that there's more than one way to be a couple, there's more than one way to be a partner. And what you do in this book is you meet the couples that I work with, you get their stories, and you get the way we work through this group, and the exercises that we do, and the conversations that we have. Because what I'm teaching these couples to do is to listen for themes, to listen for collective stories, listen for nuance, to listen for uniqueness, so they can say, oh, I don't have to be like any other spouse. I don't have to be in any other kind of marriage. And what I realize is that, on the first session, all the couples come in and they want to figure out where they are on the ladder of normalcy. Right? They all want to be at the top of the ladder and not be the couple at the bottom of the ladder. And what they find after a couple of sessions is on every week, your position on the ladder changes. Right? Sometimes you're the couple, you're like, based on what we're talking about, oh, I got this. And then the next week you come in, you're like, oh my God, we're a mess. And each week we take a different theme. We talk about money, we talk about sex, we talk about parenting, we talk about gender roles, we talk about life scripts and timelines, we talk about faith and religion, we talk about all these different topics over the course of the 12 weeks. And ultimately, what the course really is about is learning how to listen.
I am so impressed, Elliot. This interview exceeded my expectations. I had high expectations of you, and now we've gone beyond that. That is just incredible work.
Thank you.
It really is, because you threw me some praise for having a show about listening and focusing on it, but what I'm hearing is that you've been doing it and then operationalizing it. You brought it into your practice in a way that and made it available to other people through a book. It's a beautiful. Imagine it takes a tremendous amount of work. It's an intensive exercise for you to bring that into your work and follow your values. And if listening is important, well, I'm going to build a program around it.
Yeah, well, just like what you did, right? You thought it was important, you built a program around it. And I think, and we all operationalize it differently. And I think that, teaching the people that we work with, that they can operationalize it too in their relationships. I teach parents to operationalize it with their children. I teach to do it with their partner. How all the skills in the book also apply in your workplace, with your aging parents. The skill set, once you've got the core skill set, then it's just about application.
Yeah. Right. Context and titration, how much. Yeah, I'll agree with that. I like with the podcast, the general, can you listen? Yes, I can listen. So now I can talk about it with people. And but I completely understand that, what you're saying there. And people do, people operationalize it in their own time, in their own way. And grow at whatever pace. You just help them try to keep going on track and pick up the pace when they need to catch up to their partner.
Right. And when you take it, you teach them that it's not scary. See, sometimes we think listening is scary because to listen means we have to give up power. But what they realize is they actually get more shared power when they're a better listener.
Yeah.
Right? It really is about a power dynamic. Even though we know
that it's still scary, though, it's still scary sometimes to have that template and know that, well, once I get over this hump of giving up the power and listening, then we'll sort of rebalance. But it can be a very anxiety-producing.
Well, I think it's like what I talked about with you and Kit, right? At the beginning, I said it's a dance, and teaching people that the dance is what's fun. We just have to teach them to dance.
Yeah.
Right?
Ooh, I like that. I think our time is running out, but that's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
We teach them to dance. You heard, yeah. I'm sorry for abrupt, and I apologize. That's what happens when you're so deeply listening. You're not watching the clock, right? I apologize for the abrupt transition there.
It's all wonderful.
Couples by intention, Elliot by intention, listening by intention.
Yes. Dan by intention.
Dan by intention. Yes, Dan by intention. Right. And that concludes another episode from Season 2 of OnListening. Thank you for joining us. Please check out our webpage, onlistening.net, and subscribe. Please leave reviews on your favorite podcasting site. It helps me make a name for this. I don't have corporate sponsorship, and all my guests are providing their time free, so there's no way to advertise this program other than word of mouth and your ratings. Email me, comments or questions, dan@onlistening.net. Thank you so much for joining again. Take care.